first time in weeks. Up. And first thing I'm gonna do is take a break and go get something to drink. Let's see, I do not need OBS to be up. Keep that down, that up. Boom. I don't have any of my microphone stuff, so I hope you have to deal with crappy sound. All right, Jillian's Journey. This is a working title. I don't know what I'm actually going to call it. Jillian technically means little girl, so the story would be Little Girl's Journey, and that's not really accurate. I'm actually seriously thinking about renaming the title character. Here goes. Jillian sat atop a decadent, dainty throne. The silver tendrils that composed the frame she rested. Silver tendrils that composed the frame she rested. Rested on? Hell, on my second line, I'm already looking at typos. Silver tendrils that composed the frame she rested upon could have been spun by spiders. They were so fine and distantly situated that it was only by a trick of light that they were visible. At all. The cushion she sat on was thick and white, stuffed with a soft down. Period. Jillian felt she was rested upon a precipice of easy comfort that threatened to swallow her at any instant. While she was accustomed to being called pretty, she assumed this was simply because she was a princess and those around her felt obligated to say so. Because princesses, as a rule, were expected to be pretty. Therefore, she was what they thought of as pretty. What Jillian saw in the mirror seemed to say otherwise, as the deeper she peered into the reversal of herself, the more compounded flaws she discovered. Her nose, though cutely upturned as one would expect, was too round and broad. Her skin was smooth and unblemished, but brown like the soil. Her eyes, too, despite being wide and bright, were just loamy pools of mud that glistened in the sun. Her hair was a tangled mass of dark knots, without a single redeeming quality. Only the most merciless of nurses was tasked with attempting to straighten the mess. For such events, let's take that out. To straighten the mess, for only the most daring could be trusted to tame that jungle. Nor was she some paper-thin wisp, despite how her meals were measured to try and take some of the plumpness from her cheeks. She wore corsets that squeezed like a serpent, tighter and tighter with every breath. She lived in a state of perpetual gnawing hunger, yet still her body would not shrink down to that magical princess size. Tonight she was bedazzled and adorned like a false treasure, all shine with no luster. Tonight she was bedazzled and adorned like false treasures, all shine with no luster. Her powder blue dress had precious blue and white gems sewn into the trim and aligning the details. Under each cascading row of jewels was a lace trim made of the finest silk. That trim there's twice. And jewels. Gems, gems, then jewels, that works. Sewn into the trim and aligning the details. Under each cascading row of jewels was a lace. I don't like how that sentence is, how that structure is set up. All shine with no luster, her powder blue dress had precious blue and white gems sewn into the trim. Sewn into it, aligning the details. That's all I need. Sewn into it, aligning the details. Under each cascading row of jewels was a lace trim made of the finest silk. What little fabric was visible under the layers of weight that played lightly with the eyes was a simple material, expertly woven, that would have suited Gillian fine as a plain dress. Instead, it had been ballooned into a monstrosity of puffs and poofs to hide and alter her natural frame into that of a doll. Around and before the tiny stage, her lofty throne sat upon, built the most extravagant and expensive wardrobes, all worn by individuals whose entire bearing seemed part of the same facade. Each empty smile seemed fitted and stitched to the skull of the poor, desperate soul wearing them. The most frightening smiles were the ones that seemed genuine and honest, because these were the smiles that seemed fueled by a malevolent, selfish hunger as they leered her way. The most frightening smiles were the switch that. Take out the weak language. Were the genuine and honest ones. Because these were the smiles that seemed fueled by a malevolent, selfish hunger as they leered her way. The worst of these was a woman she had been forced to call mother. This lady, above all, reveled in the honesty of the malicious pride that stretched her mouth into revealing porcelain white teeth that were straight and sharp. These innocent colored guillotines added an extra fine edge to her cutting words. The statement, either to or about the girl, seemed to slice her so finely the wound could never be seen. Every insecurity was amplified by the echo of this cold woman's casual, lilting voice that could freeze Gillian like a sudden shifting of the wind. Her lips were as red as blood, due in equal parts to the red wine the kingdom was known for, and to a meticulously painted face that distorted her sharp, predatory features. This queen of the castle was a stark contrast to Gillian, in that she was fair and thin, with brilliant yellow hair that shone like the sun, and 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 fell straight and smooth down her long, slender, pale-skinned back. Her movements were lithe and graceful as her words, until the moment she would strike with some piercing remark that left Gillian feeling as helpless as a small animal in a raptor's talons. Seeing this frozen fear on the girl was the one thing that seemed to bring this vindictive queen a genuine smile. A smile that revealed the woman's boundless cruelty. A cruelty never revealed while the sun was up. See, I think the repetition works in this paragraph. And the castle was alive with guests and diplomats, but at night, after long shadows had consumed the earth, her rage reverberated down the halls. She would scream at servants and guards, the king, and most often at Gillian herself. Gillian knew all too well that the queen's gleaming, genteel smile beneath her gaudy golden crown was only a mask. The real face lay beneath, wild, wide eyes of furious blue, set in a beet-red scowl, frothing at the mouth as she screamed every perceived flaw or whispered rumor. She would shriek until her voice cracked under the strain, and then she would turn violent. Of course, the queen hadn't always been this way. Once she had been a lowly maidservant, attending the previous queen, Gillian's true mother, In those days she had seemed humble, even kind. But after the queen's death, that demure servant quickly found her way into the king's bed. In Gillian's memory, it was as if the crown slipped from her mother's head and landed upon the Weasley usurper without ceremony or question. When the true queen lived, this pale imitator had mirrored her so perfectly that no one could doubt her sincerity. But with her mistress's light extinguished, the shadows it once held at bay revealed the jagged cruelty beneath, the twisted lines that had always framed her borrowed radiance. Gillian endured the abuse with a quiet dignity. Though the pale queen raged with ferocity, she never struck with a closed fist, only a weak, trembling claw of a hand, half curled, that flailed pathetically atop Gillian's head. It was less a blow and more a tantrum, a gesture that bruised more pride than flesh. Gillian would cry out, or remain still until the queen, nursing her own hand, retreated in frustration. She never forgot the first time that claw landed, nor the smile that spread across the sub-queen's face when she realized she could get away with it. That smile, wide, sincere, and glistening with cruel liberation, was the most honest expression Gillian had ever seen her wear. In the decades since, she'd never seen anything quite so genuine. Now she sat, quietly poised, as the perfect princess emptied almost entirely of herself, lest some spark of soul rise within her and ignite the queen's hellish rage, which would be released as soon as the guests had left. And what a varied and almost comical collection of dignitaries there were to strut and posture before her. Each one was dressed in shimmering decadence to the degree that the sight of golden filigree had become as redundant as leaves on a tree. And that line has a lot of poetry. They paraded the hall, either dancing in wide, slow circles or simply milling about as they dined and drank, while speaking in high, lofty tones, each meant to carry over the others. They came in all varieties of shapes, none of them attractive. Rather, they seemed like caricatures of excess. Some were short and wide, like a lack of height could be easily substituted for girth, and others were gaunt and haggard by a lack of definition. Other than gaudy fashion, they were all united by an ethereal disdain for each other. The guests would occasionally break from the humdrum revelry to come bid well wishes to the guest of honor, Princess Gillian. The king and queen stood to either side like perhaps guards, or even more so, ticket vendors who greeted each pompous passerby with royal swagger. Even from behind, Gillian could sense their eyes lighting up at the potential prizes to be gleaned from these patrons. While they enjoyed the prestige, it was all too clear that they were here for profit, trading Gillian's life and freedom for some grand show of handing her over to a fashionably late suitor she had never met. While she dreaded what fate might await her, she eagerly anticipated the moment she might pass through the castle gates, never to return. Another guest approached, round-faced, sweating, and leering hungrily. The porcine politician bowed with exaggerated slowness, using the motion as an excuse to eye her up and down. His face was flushed beet red, not with embarrassment, but exertion. Even the light dancing and three shallow stares had taxed his limited reserves. So much of his body seemed committed to the work of digestion that little remained for dignity. Princess, he stammered as he bowed again, his leer widening in an even grander gesture that Gillian perceived to be what it was, a mockery. The royal guardians behind and on either side beamed at the sign of fealty, knowing it was meant for them. This entire affair was less a presentation of Gillian's beauty and more an auction, it seemed. A strange ripple moved through the crowd. The music stumbled. A sudden discordant note from every corner of the hall. Past the puffed-up politician, sweating through his finery, Gillian saw him. A tall figure, draped in dark garb, glided lazily through the crowd. He moved like water, weaving, never rushed, as if the festivities parted to accommodate him. He was striking. Even hunched, he stood a head taller than the other guests. Long, dark, blackish hair draped loosely down his back, but what caught Gillian's breath were the ears, pointed, distinct, cutting clean triangles through the mess. She gasped. A high elf? But no, something was off. His presence lacked the polish described in her books. His clothes were worn, his chest was bare, red trousers tattered at the hem, and wide, bare feet that padded silently across the marble like some great beast. He plucked food from plates with a casual indifference and joined snippets of dance, only to drift away before the steps were complete. Gillian studied him, mesmerized. His narrow eyes scanned the room, not with judgment, but disinterest. They passed over brocade and gems like weeds in a field. Then he looked at her. just for a breath, and her heart leapt in her chest like an excited puppy. His steely gaze pierced her, saw her, and moved on with a flick of one thin brow. The politician beside her reddened at being ignored, puffed in outrage, until he turned and truly saw the stranger. He blanched. "By the Maker," he whispered, "it's a Nephilim!" "What on earth is one doing here of all places?" the Queen asked, her silky smooth composure starting to ruffle. "And at this time?" The king, a short, once round man who now appeared drained of his juice like a grape withered on the vine, balked and sought his words carefully before speaking wolfishly. "Perhaps it is a blessing, my queen." "Fool!" the queen snapped. "Why would a member of the divine race bless any kingdom loyal to Morrigan?" With that the king, lord of the land, bit his tongue and stifled his voice. Gillian had watched her once happy, beaming father wither under the cold looks from the queen. He had lost his voice years ago and now existed as a symbol of his once greatness. The elf strode forward with indifference, his eyes darting the rafters as if following some invisible quarry the way a cat does. He loomed over the three figures, king, queen, and politician, and yet he had not yet ascended the stairs. In his shadow they instinctively cowered. The queen quickly unfroze and composed herself enough to direct a comment to the pale, aloof guest. "And by what great fortune of happen chance do we owe the honor of your presence?" His eyes darted down to her for an instant, and he again flicked his brow, this time in a look of obvious disgust. "Why do you look so sticky?" he asked the queen before turning his gaze back up toward the ceiling like he had no interest in her reply. Gillian, despite herself, laughed. Not a long laugh, not a happy laugh, but a sudden burst. A bolt of laughter that ruptured up from some part long since forgotten. The queen snapped back with an expression that told Gillian the woman's carefully produced mask had been instantly shattered. The princess felt an ice-cold terror start to crawl up her legs as she braced for what insult or injury was to follow. As the tall figure took his first step onto the stage, he passed over the 3 steps in a single movement, and rose up to block the light from above and the sight of the crowd. Before her, Gillian saw only his tall, casually intimidating figure casting a dark shadow over all that had terrified her for so long. He maintained his indifference by fixing his gaze tightly to the back wall and tilting his head in contemplation. The politician panicked and dove off the side of the stage before scrambling on all fours to hide underneath it. The queen's menacing, rabid expression was unrestrained as she wheeled back to the pale figure above her. In the silence, the deflated monarch found his weak and faltering voice. "It is nice to see a noble elf again." At the word noble, the stranger glanced down at the shell of a man, and Gillian noted a pitying look pass over the smooth, unblemished features. His eyes then flashed back to Gillian, and his gaze hardened into dark blue razors that caught the light and held it like a dagger to her throat. She felt exposed, bare, as if for the first time someone didn't see the princess and all she was supposed to be. Instead, someone for once was seeing the girl. Gillian's breath caught in her chest. Her throat tightened, not from fear, not entirely, but from some unnameable pressure inside her that had no place to go. No one had ever looked at her like that, like she was real. The crowd buzzed faintly behind him, voices muttering in disbelief, but it all seemed to come from far away. His face tightened into a beautiful scowl as he muttered, "You don't belong here anymore." He glanced at the queen again, with casual dismissal, before turning back and facing the crowd. Gillian noted his cloak was a long, tattered jacket with the sleeves missing, as the tail of it snapped at the queen. With this second assault to her ego, she snapped, her rage now on display for the court to see. "Guards!" she ordered with a tense raised claw. "Seize him! Do not let him disrupt the ritual." The words echoed through the hall like a stone dropped in still water, but no one moved. The guards stood frozen, eyes flicking to one another, waiting for someone else to step forward first. The stranger didn't flinch. He looked slowly from one guard to the next, his face unreadable, bored even, as if they were all background noise to some far more interesting thought. He sighed. "Still playing your little pageant," he said, and then to the whole room. "I know exactly what you vermin are. Now flee before me for my amusement." He spread his arms, not wide, but enough to show his empty hands. No sword, no weapon, and in doing so, twin flames ignited in his palms. A quiet gasp rippled through the crowd. Someone dropped a goblet. Without turning back or looking at Gillian, he spoke softly in a voice that struck harder than any assault by the queen. "Don't worry, little bird," he murmured. "You'll fly soon." And then, without another word, he stepped off the stage and seized an attendee by the throat with a flaming grasp. The dignitary choked and struggled before orange tendrils started to from the move through them from this contact point. Their smooth skin became haggard as their features twisted into something menacing and very afraid. The horrific transformation lasted for a moment before the once noble attendee burst into flame completely and then fell into a pile of ash. Chapter 2. The shock that struck the room displaced time itself, stretching that moment into eternity. As the vagrant elf wiped his ash-covered palm on his jacket, a scream from somewhere in the room shattered the stillness. Under all the pomp and swagger, the decadent designs, and the polished luster, something had been released. Something primal and filthy that had been living in the hearts of so many called noble. The wicked transformation was not contained to the first victim. The transmogrification spread like a contagion and instantly infected those most decorated and revered. They were not just ignited, they were unveiled. What looked like nobility melted away with every flicker of firelight. The ornate layers they wore, jewels, medals, wigs, powdered faces, began to smolder and fall away, revealing skin that was gray, cracked, or scaled beneath. One lord, previously the picture of opulence, shrieked as his face peeled in two directions, revealing a horned snout snarling underneath. Another gasped, but the gasp curdled into a growl as a second set of teeth broke free from his cheek, curling into a jagged smile that did not belong to any man. He lunged blindly, not at the Nephilim, but at a fellow guest, raking sharp claws through a velvet coat to tear at flesh beneath. Then came the panic. The enchantment of order shattered. The screams bloomed across the ballroom like fire flowers. Nobles ran in every direction, not just from the stranger, but from each other. Friends turned on friends, masks crumbled to reveal monstrous truths, and Jillian watched, frozen on the stage as chaos bloomed in perfect grotesque symmetry. Only the queen remained still, her eyes wide and impossibly blue, locked onto the Nephilim with a venomous mixture of fear and recognition. Her clawed hand trembled now, not from anger, but something more ancient. You, she hissed, backing away one step. You should not exist. You were sealed. The Nephilim cocked his head at her, expression unreadable. You remember, he said quietly. That means you're old enough to rot properly. He took a single step forward. The queen shrieked and flung a hand toward him. Not to strike, but to cast. Her fingers erupted in black flame. Not the warmth of fire, but the brittle, dry heat of decay. The spell flew from her hand, a shrieking lance of rot. The Nephilim caught it. His left hand, still glowing faintly, closed around the withering magic. The black fire sizzled and smoked in his palm until he squeezed, and it vanished like a dying ember. Cute, he muttered. Try that again and I'll unmake your soul. The queen stumbled back, but behind her the king was crumpled on the floor. Not from attack, but sheer collapse. His withered form wheezed for breath, a puppet whose strings had all been cut. Even now he looked to the queen for permission to faint. Jillian couldn't move. She couldn't blink. Her body was stone, but her mind raced like a bird in a cage. The flames, the monsters, the screams, the peeling skins, none of it made sense. But what terrified her the most was some part of her expected it. As if a crack inside her had just split wide open, and the truth she'd spent a lifetime suppressing had begun to seep out like light from a long buried lantern. She turned her head, and the Nephilim was looking at her again. His expression softened, just a hair, enough to carve out something unfamiliar in his otherwise sharp face. Concern. You all right, little bird? He asked, not loudly, but the words found her like arrows find their mark. Jillian opened her mouth and then closed it. What are they? She managed to whisper, voice shaking. What did you do to them? He tilted his head again, as if surprised by the question. I didn't do anything, he said. I just stopped pretending. As he turned back to the crowd, a grin spread wide across his face, revealing sharp teeth and a mischievous spirit. He walked amongst the chaos, reveling at the sight of it. Now this is a ritual worth attending. That's right, eat the rich, feast on their fat. His laughter carried over and danced with the mayhem. Reaching the spot where the musicians had previously played sweet songs of enchantment, he stooped down to retrieve something from the now bloody pit that produced wet choking sounds as the artists fed on each other. Standing up, he held the conductor's wand high and began to wave it as if directing the frenzy around him. He danced. Not the disinterested half steps he had approached with, but a rhythmic, happy pacing that wove through the din. He swayed and spun as monstrous nobles desperately lunged toward him, only to be deftly evaded. In his free hand a fireball formed, before he used it to seize a mutating brute that rushed forward. The beast crumpled into a smoldering pile of char. Jillian watched in horror. Her stomach flipped, not from the carnage, but from the quiet, terrible realization that she wasn't afraid. She was relieved. She looked from the crumbled king to the painted queen and felt nothing but contempt thinning into pity. They had ruled her world like gods. But gods don't beg. Gods don't cower. These were just fools dressed in gold. Even Jillian knew gods danced with chaos. As blood spilled across the floor, it slipped through the ancient cracks and lines, revealing a circular design that had always been there, waiting. A strange pressure filled the room. A crushing volume, like the air itself, had gained weight. Jillian recognized it. She had felt this force all her life, but until now it had only lived inside her. The high elf seemed to lighten under the unseen mass. His postures straightened. His mischievous leer widened. Throwing the conductor's baton behind him with a careless flick, it bounced off the queen's shaky crown. Jillian's voice choked, then found itself. "Why don't you stop it?" she whispered, voice taut under the weight. "Stop it?" he asked. "I want them to finish it. But if you insist, I can speed this haphazard summoning up. Let's see what kind of prize is at the bottom of this box." With that, he began his ignoble assault. He caught one of the altered beasts mid-lunge and hoisted it into the air, tearing it in two like parchment. Black blood splattered across the stone, seeping eagerly into the circular design beneath their feet. He flung the twitching halves aside like spent fruit and seized another, slamming it into the ground with such force the marble cracked. A stomp followed, not to kill, but to squeeze, until the creature gave up its last oozing gasp. And still he moved through them, ripping, smashing, burning, a force of barbaric joy. He wasn't killing to survive. He was celebrating. The destruction of the wicked was his feast. The air began to hum, a slow, heavy pulse that throbbed like a drum. "Yo, what's up, Dion?" With every kill, it quickened, deepened, as if the death and anarchy were blood in the veins of something vast and ancient, something being brought back to life. The queen, who had stood frozen in the posture of a cornered cat, teeth bared, claws raised, finally moved. She threw her head back and loosened a high, cruel laugh that sliced through the screaming. "Fool!" she shrieked. "Blood is blood! You've interrupted our ritual, and still our master comes." "I know," he said with a shrug, before grabbing two snarling patrons and slamming them together with a sickening crunch, reducing them to a single pulpy pile. He turned, now stained and steaming, and began to walk. This time there was no swirling crowd to weave through, no games, no distraction. Only a straight, deadly line from him to Jillian. Seeing her orchestrations ruined, the queen reanimated in a panic. Seizing a knife that had been tucked into her bodice, she raised it high in the air as her other hand buried its claws into Jillian's thick, curly hair to wrench the girl's skull back. The dainty crown the princess carried fell and rolled off the stage. The queen pressed the silver blade to Jillian's throat. "Go ahead," said the Nephilim, stopping before the stage. He looked down at the enraged queen. "Then you'll have nothing left to offer your master when he rises." The queen faltered as if struck. Jillian looked to the elf, who stood suddenly passive as he looked at her with kindness. "It was never meant to be you," he said softly, "yet here we are." Looking to the king and then to the queen, he stated, "You realize you are just the same as him, right? Just a flimsy puppet on a string for Morgan to dangle and make dance." The queen snapped at the Nephilim and loosened her hold slightly on the girl. "I am no one's puppet. While the Empress may have led me to this castle, it was I who poisoned the queen and took her crown. It was I who replaced the court, and it was I who orchestrated the rise of our great prince." At this confession, Jillian felt something rise within her, a great rejection of all she had endured in the name of duty. Suddenly the claw at her scalp and the knife at her throat felt as flimsy as the lies she had accepted for so long. A spark caught fire within her, rising like the elf's own flame. Feeling the urge to rise, Jillian looked to the stranger for guidance. Turning his back to her, he stared at the center of the circle and crackled and spat black sparks into the air. An otherworldly wind wove about them that was hot and dry like the desert. "Blood is blood," he repeated with a casual disregard. Jillian seized his meaning and the handle of the blade. The queen's hand, once a source of torment, of shrieking fits and pitiful claws, now felt brittle, frail. Her fingers were no more formidable than dried leaves trembling in a storm. The silver knife trembled between them. For a moment, neither moved. Then Gillian twisted. A sharp cry rang out from the queen as the queen staggered back. Hand torn from Gillian's hair. The blade remained in Gillian's grasp, shaking. She did not raise it. Not yet. The queen cradled her hand and hissed. But it was not the fury Gillian had come to fear. It was panic. It was disbelief. You, she started, but Gillian cut her off. No more lies, she said, her voice quiet but clean. No more pretending you ever had any power. You wore cruelty like a crown, but you were always just a servant. Gillian pointed the curved silver blade at the sorceress. That's what she really was. For that was what really she. That's sloppy. Um, was what she really was. Not a queen, but a deceiver and consort to devils. The Nephilim watched with a subtle nod. The heat in the room twisted into something deeper, not flames, but revelation. The air tasted like bitter truth. Blood is blood, he murmured again, though this time his tone had the reverence of a priest and the threat of a storm. From the shadows the king whimpered. The queen shrank, and Gillian, the girl, the scapegoat, the sacrifice, lunged forward. She wasn't running, she wasn't pleading, she was becoming. The fine silver edge pierced the sorceress's chest, cutting off her scream before it could form. Their eyes met, just once, in a moment of raw, wordless understanding. The once golden queen staggered. Blood ran freely down her bodice, spilling off the stage like cursed wine, feeding the very spell she had spent a lifetime weaving. Her life and its grand design ended in the same breath. Chapter 3. The air was still. Bodies, both human and demon, lay scattered in bloodied heaps. Those who hadn't been transformed or slaughtered had fled up the stairs, screaming. Their shrill cries reverberated down the halls, then vanished. Now only a wretched silence remained, crawling into Gillian's ears, prying loose memories she'd long since locked away. Her mother's slow withering under the traitorous maid's care, Morgan's dark elf diplomats whispering in the usurper's ear, and further back, buried in a memory she wasn't sure she should have, she saw herself as a baby, glowing with brilliant light in a darkened room. All these images rushed into her mind, setting her hands trembling. The silver knife, slick with the queen's blood, slipped loose and clattered to the floor, shattering the oppressive silence. Exposed, with no self-delusion left to shield her, Gillian felt her legs threaten to buckle beneath her. The Nephilim, high elf or something stranger, crouched low by the circle, watching it with sick bemusement. Gillian's inner unraveling seemed beneath his notice. He simply rocked back and forth, childlike in his anticipation. "Come on, you bastard," he whispered, voice thick with a low growl. The air turned hot, suffocating, as the stone floor within the circle began to fall away, stone by stone revealing a swirling, luminous blue font of magical energy. It spiraled like a hungry whirlpool, pulling at the surrounding chamber with ravenous force. Tapestries tore loose, tables and silverware clattered into the void. Even the bodies of the fallen were dragged toward the vortex, consumed without ceremony. The elf's grin widened. Gillian finally collapsed, sinking into the inflated poofs of her dress, a crumpled pile of disbelief. And in exchange for all it devoured, the font breathed out a storm of sand, hot, stinging, and dry. In an instant, the ballroom's gilded luxury was stripped away, replaced by the grinding grit of a wind-blown desert. As the elf stood, the wind died, and the sand settled, as if the very air knew to bow before him. The circle stilled, smoothing into a surface like polished glass. From its center, black flame uncoiled, twisting upward into a cocoon that cracked and split, revealing a figure stitched together from all it had devoured. Flesh, torn, compacted, contorted, mingled with stone, silver, and silk. Tables, finery, and corpses had fused into a single wretched monstrosity, a grotesque monument to excess. Gillian's stomach lurched. This, this was her intended suitor. The figure loomed over the elf, twice his height and still rising, a mass of stitched decadence and stolen flesh. But the ragged stranger didn't flinch. He only grinned wider, eyes gleaming with wicked delight. I love these slapdash rituals, he chuckled. You morons will cram anything together just to claw your way into this world. Its breath whistled like wind wheezing through a rocky pass. Eyes blinked from where velvet had melted into skin. Something deep inside it stirred the machination to life, and laughed. Its laughter echoed in dull, oppressive waves that filled Jillian's already broken heart with a fresh swell of despair and loneliness. Numb, her thoughts clouded and thick, she barely registered the thing's bent, stitched body lurching toward her. Ugly and eager, delight twisting its features into something almost joyful. But as its grotesque fingers reached out, the expression faltered. The elf, still crouched beside the circle, had finally caught its attention. Asmodeus? He asked, almost amused. Is that you? The demon bulked, standing silent as its disproportionate eyes swirled with hellish fire, flames that twisted and flared as if struggling to focus on the figure rising beneath them. The elf rose, still crouched in bemused anticipation a heartbeat ago, now standing tall between the towering flesh golem and the crumpled maiden behind him. It is you, he declared, laughing. I came looking to banish a demon, and what do I find? A devil? Lucky me! He tilted his head with mock reverence. Granted, you're the lowest and most pathetic of the bunch, but hey, I'll take the win. The demon lowered its reaching claw. Realization flickered across its grotesque face. Fear twisted through the stitched and swollen features, a look that didn't belong on something built from hunger and bone. The grinding churn of stone and meat struggled to form words, but one crackled through, like a curse. Jost? The elf's grin turned sharp. Bingo, bitch boy. He took a casual step back, savoring the demon's hesitation. How's your mom? I'm shocked she let you out without a leash. The elf leapt lightly onto the stage, passing before Jillian without so much as a glance. He grabbed the queen's lifeless corpse by the arm and dragged it aside like dead weight. It really is a pity you couldn't find a proper host, he said, flicking blood from his hand with lazy disdain. Then he gestured toward Jillian. But this is sick. His tone turned to ice. To try and possess a little girl out of your fascinations, out of your lust, you call love? It's not romantic, it's disgusting. Objectification dressed in poetry. How many prizes, how many baubles must you curse with your impotence? The creature flinched, staggering back as the elf hopped effortlessly down into the circle. The radiant pool of energy rippled beneath his feet with each lithe step, as if even here he walked on water. Now then, the elf said coolly, you missed a piece, and from what I can tell, a nervous system. Let me help you with that. With a flick of effort, he flung the queen's body into the demon's seething mass. The flesh swallowed it greedily, mercurial and obscene, drawing it inward with unnatural ease. In an instant, tendons stitched, bones cracked into place, and the queen's form became part of the thing's grotesque anatomy. Jillian's stomach turned, her mind filled with screaming silence as the full horror landed. If it touched her, even once, it would make her part of itself too. This was what they'd raised her for, to smile, to obey, to offer herself up. Now she knew what that meant. If it touched her, if she let it, she'd disappear forever. The demon reeled backward, twitching, spasming, reshaping around the queen's body. Her form twisted again. Too many limbs, too many eyes, too many teeth, all wrong. The air cracked with the stench of blood and burnt silver. Joss stepped forward through the glowing pool of energy, each step sending out another ripple, unbothered by the collapsing ritual around him. As the shifting form settled into something even more monstrous, with the queen's stretched and bent red-lipped there now emerged from the creature's chest. As it spoke again, the queen's voice mixed and echoed with the tone that resonated inside Jillian's dazed skull. She was mine. I whispered her pain into meaning. I filled her emptiness. You would have let her rot in silence. She desires me and the freedom I offer. What would you do but hide her in another castle? The high elf cocked his head and gave the demon an incredulous look. Glancing back at the dazed maiden, he smirked a short laugh before turning his attention once more to the devil before him. You think I came for her? He said, jerking a thumb in Jillian's direction. No, no. I came here for you. He extended his hand, and the air around him seemed to condense, folding, hardening, until it formed a solid object in his grasp. A long, twisted blade appeared, black as nightmare, shaped from bone and fang. It was terrible to look at, alive. From the thickest curve of the blade a single eye opened, roving madly until it fixed on the devil. When its gaze landed on Asmodeus, it let out a delighted squeal that scraped at the back of Jillian's eyes. "Calm down, hate spreader," the elf said as one might scold an impulsive child. "This one is all mine." As he stepped into the center of the circle, the devil recoiled, shrinking back until its flesh pressed against the far side of the magical barrier. The white light burned where it touched, forcing the creature to flinch forward with a hiss of pain. The elf raised his hand. With a sharp motion, he spun the blade downward and slammed it into the circle, blade first. Runes erupted from 5 points, racing outward to the circle's edge. They twisted around its perimeter, weaving into an intricate pattern, beautiful despite the chaos and blood surrounding it. The blade stood upright, buried in the stone. Gripping it with both hands, the elf began to turn it with deliberate force. As it rotated a full half turn, a snap echoed through the chamber, audible and metaphysical. The sigil, the circle, the whirlpool of energy vanished. The barrier collapsed. The demon staggered backward, dismayed. Its form trembled, its arrogance cracked. "What did you do?" it asked, voice small, no longer resounding with infernal authority. "I locked the gate," Joss replied, stepping back from the wicked blade now buried deep in the earth beneath the stone. Jillian noticed it sat within a recessed plaque or monument, an old marker perhaps, into which the weapon fit with eerie perfection, as though it had always been meant to rest there. The elf advanced. "Now you can't escape back to hell, back to your mommy." He smiled. "Now you're all mine to play with." Chapter 4. The creature twitched, still bleeding light from where the barrier once held it. Its limbs clawed at form, trying to reconfigure into something threatening. Wings, claws, a mask of majesty. But the magic no longer obeyed. Joss' bare feet echoed softly in the silence. No armor, no sword, just the sound of flesh on stone, steady as judgment. "You were always a coward," he said, rolling his shoulders. "All theater, all noise, always hiding behind some pitiful smile to mask your emptiness." The demon hissed, trying to speak, but the voice was broken. A chorus, unsure of which mouth to use. "She wanted." A fist slammed into his jaw. The explosion that followed wasn't metaphorical. Joss' hand lit up as it connected. Fire laced with something older than flame, and the whole side of the creature's face burst outward in a wash of molten filth. It screamed, or tried to, but another blow caught it in the throat. The fire didn't go out. It deepened, consuming what it touched with purpose. "I watched her fall for you," Joss growled, driving a knee into the demon's ribs, each one snapping like dry sticks. "After years of tricks, degradation, and abuse, just so you could get a pat on the back from your pathetically prideful father." The demon collapsed, wheezing. Joss let it fall, then stomped on its spine. The force cratered the stone. "You dressed up her chains like they were wings. You sold her fantasies in exchange for my own dreams. Just when she was almost free, you caged her again with your wanting whispers. I watched her shrink under your influence, and how she delighted in your sad, simpering company." Flames curled along his arms now, not wild, but controlled, measured, like branding irons that knew exactly where to land. She wasn't weak. She was waiting for someone to see her, not desire her, not use her. See her, her flaws and jagged edge for what they were, scars you and your ilk left behind. The demon tried to crawl, but every limb it formed burned off before it could be used. Joss crouched beside it, fire still wreathing his hands. "You wore a manipulative grin with half-closed eyes. You made her cry. When you pulled her back into your wanton clutches, I was made the villain for all the pain you had caused. I carried her scars. I was her scapegoat, and I was left wandering in the desert." The thing twisted, the queen's lips moving from its chest. This time no voice came, only a breathless rasp, like a prayer that had lost its god. He leaned in, and the demon whispered in choked gasps. "You are no emperor, merely a fool with an angel inside him. And you squandered her, not us." The fire roared. Jillian sat frozen, a stunned witness to the burning carnage. The elf's words struck in her like heartless embers, simmering with grief, rage, and a loneliness she couldn't begin to understand. At first she thought he was speaking about her, but the longer he raged, the clearer it became this wasn't her story. There was something else behind his fury, someone whose ghost clung to his every blow. What followed twisted something deep in her chest, because as the demon writhed in its ruin, she found herself beginning to feel sorry for it. In a whirling dervish of flame, the elf attacked. Hands, feet, elbows, knees, raining devastation while he ranted on to the beast, who could only suffer and stammer. You sell lust as sex. That's the sweet lie they teach children, to keep them curious and blind, focused on attacks from one direction, while the enemy, you, slips over the back wall. The demon's body flew from one wall and crashed into the far side, the elf flipping the impossible mass with unnatural ease, sending bits shattering off in charred pieces. Lust isn't the body. Lust is longing with no destination, a hunger that only gets louder the more you feed it. Joss leapt across the breadth of the hall, propelled by a trail of flame, and landed on the devil's guts. The beast gurgled a scream that shook the foundations of the castle. It's the itch in your soul that promises meaning in the next touch, the next thrill, the next pair of eyes that claim they see you, but they never do. Not really. Only the protective facade you wear. The elf grabbed the demon's face between smoldering palms and pulled the monstrosity close. It's a trick, a carnival of flesh and fragrance, flashing lights and open mouths, and the deeper you go, the emptier you become. Slamming the makeshift skull into the ground, Joss drove a burning heel into the back of it, grinding downward. Lust doesn't want you to be satisfied. It can't be. That's the point. It wants you chasing, running in circles, mistaking thirst for desire and your exhaustion for devotion. When you're tired enough, when you're used up and hollowed out, that's when hell opens the door. Not with chains, with comfort, with a whisper that says, stay here. You've earned this. There's nothing else out there for you. Joss threw the demon, whose body was now shrinking, reforming desperately to maintain symmetry, as it reeled to the center of the room. Asmodeus struggled to all fours and tried crawling away, pitifully, only for the elf to skip to his location and kick him in the ribs, flipping him onto his back. Straddling the demon's chest, Joss pinned its flailing limbs and began raining flaming fists down on the beast's skull, shattering and reforming it over and over again as he continued his sermon. I've seen men drag kingdoms into the dirt for a glint of thigh, watched women sell their joy just to feel adored, and all of them, sank smiling. You're no prince, no ruler. You're just the one who holds the door open, letting mankind stumble in, thinking they've fallen in love, when really they're falling into want, into your wretched wasteland full of hollow caves and echoes. Because lust isn't about what you crave. It's about trying to fill the emptiness, to drown the fear that you're not enough. And once that fear owns you, Joss yanked the devil's blistered face closer, closer, until their scorched foreheads nearly touched. His hands burned brighter, fiercer, the sizzling grip shrinking the creature with every second. What had once towered now writhed like a child in his grasp. You'll wear your chains like jewelry. The words spilled like acid, low and trembling with fury, and begged for more. Joss rose to his feet. He held what remained, an imp now, twisted from borrowed flesh and broken stone, dangling by its throat. Its limbs flailed, pathetic and weightless, like scraps in the wind. Now, he thundered, beg me for what you desire. Beg me for what you crave. The creature gargled through melting lips. Mercy. That pitiful word was its last. Joss set it alight, and stood still as the thing screamed and cracked, burning in his grip. He watched it die without blinking, drinking in its suffering as if it might purge his own. Silence followed, heavy, ash-laced, awful. Then finally Joss spoke, voice dry as bone. Well, maybe it was lust. He let the cinders fall. Almost got me hard. The instant the last ember of the imp crumpled to dust, the air in the throne room changed. A groan deeper than thunder echoed from the bones of the castle. The floor lurched. Walls cracked like glass. The high vault of the ceiling warped as if under invisible hands, squeezing the life out of the structure itself. Jillian stumbled backward as stone wept dust, and the stained glass windows screamed in their frames. All around her, things once bound by magic or arrogance came undone. A tower split down its spine. Statues fell like drunks from a ledge. The throne, the one Jillian had stood before, now scorched and unguarded, crumpled into ash. And Joss watched it all, unmoved. A smear of soot clung to his cheek, the only sign he'd been in a battle at all. He didn't smile. He didn't mourn. He didn't look at her. He whispered, almost to himself, "No kingdom worth keeping ever sits this still." Julian couldn't tell if he meant the castle, the devil, or himself. The castle, now emptied of the expectations that had kept it standing for so long, shuddered and groaned as it began to collapse. Without the weight of prophecy, of ceremony, of waiting, it had nothing left to hold it upright. The stones no longer remembered why they had been stacked. The halls exhaled. The high towers bent like old knees, and the glass windows spidered and gave way to a sound like distant applause. The throne room split first, not from battle but from relief, as if the structure itself had endured a tension too long held. Now freed of its burden, it sagged and sighed, returning its borrowed grandeur to the earth. Dust swirled through the corridors, carrying the last whispers of oaths no one kept. Joss stepped lightly through the ruin, as though he'd known that this would happen all along, as though he hadn't come to save the kingdom but to bury it. His steps moved in perfect rhythm with the destruction. He dodged falling stones like he was out for a casual stroll. He stopped and picked up a curved silver dagger, still red with the queen's blood. Slipping it into the pocket of his long dark jacket, it vanished completely. He sighed silently as dust thickened the air, and the structure screamed to ruin around him. Then, as if by chance, he turned to Jillian and exclaimed, "Oh, crap! I forgot about the girl!" He said it like one might remember a kettle on the stove. The ruin didn't pause. The castle continued its slow collapse, indifferent to memory, mockery, or sentiment. Chapter 5. Jillian stood amid the falling world like a painting on the verge of motion, a stillness not from calm but from disuse. She looked around as though waking in a dream turned strange. The air, thick with ancient dust and crumbling enchantments, barely stirred her blue dress. Her eyes, wide and uncertain, scanned a throne room that had once watched her sleep beneath glass, and now it couldn't even hold its own weight. A ceiling beam groaned above her. Joss' hand shot up, a lazy gesture, and caught the beam before tossing it aside, where it lodged safely into a pile of rubble. He scooped her up in one arm and growled, "Hang on." They were off, moving with impossible speed, so swift it felt like teleportation. At the top of the stairs leading out of the hall, Jillian looked back, just in time to see a massive carved stone crash down and pulverize what remained of her dainty throne. Down the corridors, the Nephilim bounded, past ancient tapestries unraveling in their wake, histories of the elves torn from the walls. Sconces flared madly as the wild elf passed, each one burning through its fuel in a final blaze of forgotten glory. As they reached the grand foyer, Jillian caught sight of one last figure, a mural of the first high elf, Josirian. The name of the name the Golden Queen had cursed and spat upon more times than Jillian could count. He was once the grand definition of virtue and piety. Framed in fire, the noble figure stood tall in royal garb and winged helm, long dark blue hair flowing behind him, a gleaming sword of light in his hand. In hand. The image flickered, then began to fade as the flames guttered and died. Then she felt it, Joss' strength shifting. She was flung, suddenly, into wind and darkness. Jillian tumbled. Her massive dress caught the brunt of the force and shredded itself to spare her. Behind her, the castle collapsed utterly, belching its death rattle of dust and debris. Jillian sat alone for a moment. The air cooled as the dust settled, the chaos of collapse giving way to a strange, heavy stillness. She blinked slowly, eyes adjusting to the gray haze that lingered like morning breath over the wreckage. Behind her, the shattered ruins stood like a graveyard, solemn and final, marking the place where her savior had fallen. Then the stones shifted, a grinding protest. Something moved beneath the rubble. A fist broke through, defiant, angry, deliberate. Fingers unfurled into a talon, scrabbling for leverage before pulling its master free. Jost rose, unharmed. Only his coat bore fresh tears, as though the castle had merely tried to scold him on his way out. Yoti, he called out, brushing dust from his jacket. At his shoulder, a burning sigil flared to life, blossoming like a fire-lit flower into the image of a woman both radiant and unreal. Her hair flowed in a long, lustrous mane of white gold, framing features fiercer and more flawless than any queen's. She wore black robes, part priestess, part courtesan, with a string and instrument slung across her back. Her eyes burned with the same mystical blue as the summoning circle, and glowed with identical, unnatural light. She floated effortlessly beside Jost, her presence serene, almost casual. But what struck Gillian most were the woman's long, pointed ears, furred like an animal's and blending seamlessly into her golden mane. Behind her, a fan of long, fluffy tails, each the same spun gold, waved and wagged as though both lifting her and greeting her master in joyous welcome. Blue flames crowned her heels, and smaller flames, ghostly, flickering, danced about her like a silent entourage. Gillian's breath caught again. Such glory should not exist. Joss didn't so much as blink as at her appearance. He just asked, "What's the score?" The ethereal woman raised a brow and unrolled an invisible scroll that appeared in her hand as if it had always been there. A string of glowing glyphs unfurled in the air before Jost, no louder than a whisper, just enough to read. Gate sealed, 1. Demons defeated, 45. Devil banished, 1. Chaos item secured, 1 cursed silver dagger. Damsels rescued, 1. Treasure found, 9,949 pieces of gold and silver. 49, Jost muttered. 50 would sound better. Rounder. He turned back to the wreckage, casually tossing aside massive stones like loose leaves. After a moment, he grinned and reached deep into the rubble, retrieving not one but 2 golden coins. He slipped one into his pocket and tossed the other away without a thought. Yoti, the spirit maiden, updated the scroll with a wave. Correction, she said. Treasure found. 9,950 pieces of gold and silver. A final sigil bloomed behind Jost's head, halo-like, if a halo could look profoundly tired. He waved a hand, and the whole display scattered like ash on the wind. In the darkness before dawn, Jost flexed his jacket, shaking off the dust. As the first rays of sunlight crept over the horizon, Gillian gasped. His hair, long, ink-black in shadow, shimmered into a brilliant shade of dark blue, cascading down his back in a length impossible for any man to maintain. "You look like Josirian," she muttered. The elf offered only a sideways glance and a sneer that revealed the glint of fang. Then, as absent-mindedly as he'd remembered to save her, absent-mindedly is one word, really. His attention drifted back to the rubble. Cupping his hand to his mouth, he called into the wreckage. "Hate spreader, come here, buddy." He clambered up the rocks, his voice turning melodic, almost sweet. "Hate spreader, where are you, pal?" Tilting his head, he listened for something only he could hear, then resumed hurling massive stones like bits of gravel. Nearby, the glowing blonde woman with flowing foxtails, Yoti, rolled her eyes with theatrical disgust. She vanished in a self-consuming blue flame. "Effed," Joss called, still shifting debris. In response, an orange flame bloomed beside Gillian, and another stranger stepped out. This one was golden too, but burnished, as if she lived a life pressed to the hearth. Her clothes were crisp, white, and Gillian instantly and correctly guessed she was a chef. A single long tail gleamed in the sunlight, smooth and slightly translucent, like a polished eel. Her hair flowed like molten metal, parting at her ears into delicate frilled fins that the color of cherry blossoms. Her eyes were vast pools of glowing orange, like magma seen through glass, warm, bright, and bottomless. When she spoke, her voice rang like the bell on a bakery door. "Yes, master?" Joss pointed at her with a smug finality, but the smug finality of a child ordering room service. "I deserve a feast tonight. Make it glorious." "Yes, master," she bowed gracefully, and then vanished in a bloom of orange fire. He turned back to his excavation, still calling out softly as though composing a lullaby. "Hate spreader, come here, my little friend." Yet another woman appeared beside Gillian. But this one didn't arrive in a blaze. She slinked from the shadows, her gleaming eyes already fixed on the roguish elf rummaging through the rubble. She was dark and glistening, with yellow bands stretched across her segmented body like armor. Most disconcerting were her 6 spindly, sharp-looking arms, and the 8 squinting eyes that dotted her face and forehead, all narrowing at the almighty Nephilim picking through trash. Her voice was deep, gravelly, and tired, the voice of someone who had been yelling at him for centuries. "Did you tear your jacket again, Justinian?" All 6 of her tiny, sharp hands rested on her hips as she shouted up at him. "Only a little," he called down, still focused on his task. "Come on, Hate. I can't do all the work here. Come to me, pal." There was a shifting of rubble near his feet, and then something emerged from the heap. A sword, made from bones and nightmares, began dragging itself forward by its own pommel. It inched over the fallen castle like a monstrous caterpillar, and Jost followed it behind, apologizing as he walked. "I'm sorry, buddy. I got distracted saving some kid. You know how I get." The blade gurgled or ground out a response, or perhaps it was just the noise of bones scraping stone, but the elf nodded as if understanding perfectly. "Next time, pal, I swear. I owed Asmodeus that ass kicking, and you would have ended it too quickly." He stopped short, straightened up, and yelled to the sky. "It was not excessive or gratuitous." A pause, then muttering, "No, it wasn't. It was justice," he said, making exaggerated air quotes. By now the blade had gotten away from him, inching closer to Jillian with every grasping lurch. She saw it clearly now. The pommel was a black skeletal hand, and the hilt, the bones of a twisted arm. Its eyes twisted and locked onto her with evil glee as it braced, ready to pounce. Joss lunged and scooped it up, grinning. "There you are, buddy. Now remember," he smacked the flat of the blade against a stone at Jillian's feet. The stone cracked. The demon sword squealed in pain. "Behave." With that, Joss tossed the sword lazily into the air, as if to drop it. Instead, it burst apart midair, unraveling into thick, black tendrils of smoke. The smoke coiled and twisted into thorny spirals, all sprouting from the single floating eye, huge, roving, and wet with hunger. It hovered there for a moment, staring straight down at Jillian. Then it blinked and vanished. The elf strode past the stunned Jillian, and the spirit who had whispered up beside her. The tall, slender, many-limbed woman spoke with an icy venom older than time. "Your jacket. Again." Wordlessly, he slipped it off and tossed it to her in a heap. She caught it, offered only a narrow stare, and a slow shake of her head. "Will there be anything else you require?" she asked dryly, out of a formal courtesy long since expired. "Nah," he said. He drew a long breath of dawn air and standing like some half-dressed barbarian, bare-chested, wind-tossed, ragged pants, his belt forged like stone. "Now what? Where to?" The spirit, still clutching his jacket, shook her head with a hiss before dissolving into threads of shadow. The coat vanished with her into the soil. Joss looked back at the girl, now the only one left after so many spirits, weapons, and strange farewells. "No, I don't think so," he said, glancing in her direction before turning to the horizon. "Because I hate escort missions. And the pilgrimage is always the worst. Pick something else, like another demon to kick around for fun." "The pilgrimage?" Jillian repeated, half to herself, a glimmer of childhood fantasy lighting her eyes. "Who said pilgrimage?" Joss snapped, spinning to face her. Meekly, Jillian pointed. "You did. Just now." "No, I didn't," he said, stepping toward her with intensity, tapping a finger to his skull. "He did." Jillian blinked. "He who?" "Exactly," Jost muttered, turning back toward the horizon. Chapter 6. Dawn painted the landscape in its morning hues. Jillian blinked at the ruins, the light sharpening the edges of her disbelief. What had once been a vibrant, joyful kingdom from her childhood lay fallen and worn away. Buildings that once held familiar, smiling faces were reduced to rubble. No 2 stones left stacked. Only the faint outlines of their foundations whispered that anything had stood here at all. "What happened here?" she asked. "What happened to the village?" "I did," Joss replied, not taking his eyes off some distant, invisible point. "Years ago." He gestured casually to the fallen castle behind them. Didn't realize all that was inside the castle, though. Never really thought to go in. Jillian looked around again, dazed. "But I was only locked up for 10 years. How is it all so ancient looking?" Joss turned to her slightly. The magics you were under kept you fresh and naive by warping time around you. You're far older than you look, but every bit as stupid. And with that, he vanished. One moment he stood before her, the next he was shrinking. Next he was a shrinking dot disappearing into the trees. Jillian stared at the dust on her hands, and then at the torn, frayed edges of the royal gown she had sat helplessly in. Slowly, she rose. Joss turned. Jillian stared at the dust in her hands, then at the torn, frayed edges of the royal gown she sat helplessly in. Slowly she rose, feeling a tower of strength rise with her, assembled from the very ruins around her. She stood tall in the catastrophic dawn light, wiped her palms on the satin frills at her hips, and then tore them off. Without a glance, she ran after the mad elf who had destroyed her kingdom. Wait, she called between gasps, then swallowed the rest and pressed on. By the time she crossed the field to where he had vanished, her lungs burned. She pushed into the trees, her dress and hair snagging in 1,000 tiny directions. Her hair came undone as she fought through the brambles that stretched and clawed at her face. Jewels and layers of pomp tore loose, falling like brittle ornaments into the forest floor. With tapestries shredding behind her, she burst into a clearing, just in time to glimpse the elf ahead before he vanished into the tangled underbrush. Again Jillian ran, lifting the remnants of her dress and marveling at how much lighter she felt. As she neared the shadows of the forest, where she was most certain she had seen her guide vanish, the world seemed to hold its breath. The sun had thinned to a pale shimmer behind thickening leaves, and the wind no longer sang. Still her eyes caught it, the narrowest of paths, barely more than a crease in the undergrowth, winding like a forgotten thought. Crouching low, Jillian slipped into it. The branches were closer here, tighter as though the woods themselves resented her passage. But her hands moved nimbly now, tearing aside smaller limbs before they could strike her first. Bramble and thorn scratched warnings across her arms, but she no longer flinched. There was something sharpening in her, a blade honed by grief, confusion, and the brittle clarity of betrayal. The forest grew darker still. What light remained bled through the canopy in streaks like faded ink. Sounds changed, quieter, stranger. Not bird song, but rustlings too deliberate. A distant snap that didn't echo like falling wood. The smell shifted too, from earth and sap to something older, damp and mineral, like breath exhaled from a cave that had never seen firelight. She ducked beneath a low-hanging limb and kept going, faster now. The path narrowed further until she wasn't walking it so much as forcing it into being with each step. Her pace matched the pounding of her heart, but she no longer questioned the fear coiling inside her. It had become a part of her rhythm, part of her pursuit. Jost was ahead. She could feel it. and whatever lay between them now would have to move or break. Another threshold of thresh gave way to a field, long, loamy, and sun-scorched. The grasses parted, just long enough for her to glimpse him again. A flash of brilliant midnight blue, ragged red pants, and pale flesh vanishing into the far edge of the horizon, like a mirage swallowed by motion. She ran. By now the remnants of her gown clung like cobwebs, no longer fit to restrain or protect her. The soil, rich and damp beneath the blazing sun, sucked at her feet with every stride, as though the earth itself was conspiring to keep her in place. With each step the field grew heavier, her legs sinking deeper, her breath coming faster, her resolve burning hotter than the air around her. The sun was merciless, pressing down on her like judgment. Sweat ran in rivulets, mingling with the dirt that smeared her skin and made the soil even softer beneath her weight. Her body labored, but her spirit sharpened, cutting through fatigue with something that tasted like fury. Still, she did not stop. She couldn't. Some fire was raging, not just in her chest, but in the very air around her. It rippled off her skin in waves, searing her breath, tightening her jaw. Her shoes had vanished into the mud ages ago, unnoticed. She barely felt her raw soles, only the heat rising through her limbs, the kind of heat that made her wonder if she might breathe fire at any moment. Then she crossed another threshold. She pushed forward. Hey, what's up, Blind Fate? At first, she winced with every step. The pain made her shrink into herself, and her movements were halting, uneven. But as she pressed on, her feet began to find their rhythm. The stones that once stabbed now seemed to cradle her arches, as though the path had been shaped for her alone. Step by step she moved with greater ease. Her stride lengthened, her posture lifted. The searing heat faded, replaced by the cooling breeze stirred by her own momentum. She was no longer stumbling forward, she was carried. More and more she caught glimpses of the elf, flickers of blue and red, before he vanished again, always just beyond reach. Dusk pressed down, and with it came a wildness in her chest so fierce she feared her spirit might rip free and chase after whatever she had become in this fevered pursuit. Another forest loomed before her, a tangled mass of branches black as pitch. Um, I'm okay. I haven't streamed in like 2 weeks. I haven't really worked on this in the last 2 weeks. Going through a lot of changes. I'm in the process of filling out an application for a new place. Wonderful place that I found. Um, it's great. They don't have too much restriction against pets, so I might be able to keep all my animals. Um, it's right off a fishing lake where I can go kayaking. It's a pretty nice setup. I managed to find a job too that starts on the 2nd of September. I don't love it. It doesn't pay a lot. It's like 15 bucks an hour plus commission. So I really got to work on sales. Really? So you and the fella just couldn't work it out? Yeah, that's a bummer. I'm really sorry about that. I mean, at least something changed though, right? Oh, he was cheating again. Well, son of a bitch. What the fuck? That's yeah, that's yeah. I'm really sorry. I'm really sorry. That's not okay. Me and the wife are working on it. We're communicating. Um, yeah, it's a lot of back and forth with us. Yeah, oh, 7 years. That's thanks. I really hope we make it. I really hope we can figure it out. We got to get out of this house. I got to get out of this house. Hopefully, the new place will be a little bit better. We can start over and give it a fresh start. She's letting me know about a lot of things that have made her mad over the years, and that's it's good. Yeah, I really hope so. I really hope that's what we need. I really hope that does it. I got a lot of things I should apologize for. Yeah. Right now, I'm going over the writing, trying to see where I left off, trying to get the momentum back on it. I'm on chapter 6 right now. Thank you. I hope everything works out. The next piece that I need right now is to try and get a hold of a car. I'm just a little hesitant because most of my money is tied up in the stock market. Nah, that's cool. I don't need those. But I hope. I've been making a lot of changes. I'm actually in therapy now, which is that's helping. I'm doing a lot of positive affirmation type stuff when I go to sleep in order to try and like alter my subconscious and get out of my negative mindset. And I started going to church again and reading the Bible. Like I'm that desperate for change that I'm willing to throw everything that I can't change about myself by myself to a higher power and a specialist at the same time. So yeah, I never thought I would be a born again, but as long as I'm not, one of the annoying ones, that'll be good. Let's see. Dust pressed down, and with it came a wildness in her chest, so fierce she feared her spirit might rip free and chase after whatever she had become in this fevered pursuit. Another forest loomed before her, a tangled mass of branches black as pitch. They didn't just block her, they beckoned like claws, ready to drag her down into some ancient waiting hell. Still she pushed forward, certain that this is where he had gone. Darkness swallowed the path and closed in on all sides. She staggered into the black, pulled onward by something deeper than memory, some buried instinct long ignored. Invisible arms reached out to hold her back, but she broke through them, snapping limbs like brittle bones. Just as her body faltered, music crept into the silence, faint, strange, impossible, yet it called to her. The sound stirred the weary parts of her, tugging her forward like strings on a marionette. Through the blackness, a warm light bloomed, distant yet pulsing, and the music swelled into a song, humble and coaxing, threading through the dark to guide her. She pressed on, strange assurance rising in her chest. Her breath no longer labored but quickened, not from exhaustion but anticipation, as though the words long trapped inside her were finally ready to be spoken. The forest, sensing her confidence, thickened in defiance. Still she moved, tearing branches from her hair and peeling limbs from her arms as they clutched and dragged at her like jealous hands. The closer she drew to the light and music, the more the trees conspired. They closed together, forming a wall of bark and shadow, through which she could barely slip, finding cracks just wide enough for a mouse. Then all at once the warmth vanished, the light blinked out, the music fell silent. Alone in the void, Jillian faltered, no longer certain of direction, unsure even of which way was up, and then something gave way beneath her. She tumbled into the light. A decadent gala sprawled before her, soft blankets and plush pillows piled beneath silver platters laden with rich, impossible foods. Music roared again, but now wild and brilliant, wrapped in laughter and song. Dancers spun between fountains of wine. Everything glowed, shimmered, and delighted. And at the center of it all, stretched luxuriously across a silken mattress, lay a single figure. He feasted and fondled his night away, draped in revelry, attended by guests as if he were the axis on which the strange world turned. There sat Jost, looking in every way like a spoiled prince, bare-chested and flushed, surrounded by beauty and indulgence. Grapes were fed to him between kisses. Laughter curled around him like smoke. He looked nothing like the ragged man of the woods who had led her here, and everything like a creature born of appetite and command. Chapter 7. Various colored flames danced in circles through the air, driving back the dark from this pocket of paradise nestled deep in the lonely wilds. The scent of fine food was everywhere, rich and intoxicating. Those in attendance were the most beautiful and magical beings Jillian had ever seen, draped in silks, crowned in light, laughing as though sorrow had never touched them. Yet, as she took in the royal festivity, something set her teeth on edge. A flicker of unease gripped her chest. For all its beauty, the scene echoed too closely the opulence she had once been captive to. Gilded and golden, yes, but a cage all the same. She wandered in unnoticed, her burning fatigue replaced by a raw, speechless awe. At the center of the revelry, perched on a throne in tangled pillows and rumpled silks, sat the guest of honor, Jost. He looked every bit like the spoiled prince, half reclined, flanked by two exquisite women who giggled at his murmurs and draped themselves across him like sashes. He paused only to drain goblets of wine and long poles, or to stuff his mouth with fruit and spiced meats. chewing as he chuckled through half-swallowed words. He indulged in every delight at once. Kisses, compliments, wine, and warmth, yet seemed untouched by any of it. Surrounded by beauty and praise, he still looked strangely alone. A loud rumble broke the silence that had consumed her, a roar from her own stomach. Every sense locked onto a platter near her feet, piled high with golden skinned cutlets that hissed with a sweet, spicy aroma. The scent wrapped around her, flooding her mind, driving her forgotten hunger into a frenzy. She dove forward, seizing two warm pieces, their skins blistered and crisped, flecked with fragrant spices. Just as she opened her mouth, trembling with anticipation, the music stopped. The laughter died, and a voice like cracking stone cut through the air, slicing down her spine. That's not for you, girlie. Jillian froze, caught in a crouch, her hair wild, her eyes wide and feral from the day's long march. Slowly she looked up. Joss was staring down at her from his mountain of pillows. A half-eaten drumstick pointed lazily in her direction like a wand. His narrow eyes glinted with amusement, though he wore a smug, indulgent grin. That food is from the spirit realm, he said, just before sinking his fangs into the meat, stripping it to the bone with a single bite. He tossed the remains aside and drained half a goblet of wine at one long pull, and smacked his lips with theatrical relish. Jillian's stomach growled again, a wounded, pathetic noise. One bite of that, he went on, and you'll vanish into the spirit world with the rest of the guests and furniture when the party ends. He stared down at her, holding still just long enough to make sure the warning landed. Jillian remained frozen, breath shallow, her fingers trembling around the sullen food. At last she set the cutlets gently back onto the platter. The moment she let go, the music resumed. Laughter flared. The party whirred back to life as if nothing had happened. Joss turned his attention back to his feast, licking grease from his fingers as another goblet was pressed into his hand. Jillian stood slowly. Her voice was hoarse, brittle with exhaustion and shame. Aren't you affected? Though barely a whisper, the elf heard it. He leaned forward, amused, cheeks puffed with half-chewed meat. I am the lord and master of spirits, he said, spitting a bit of bone onto the floor. I cannot be whisked away by those I command. He waved the thought away as if it bored him. Besides, he added lazily, sinking deeper into the pillows and arms of the women, I'm half in that realm most of the time anyway. He gave a pleased sigh and turned his face back toward the waiting lips and idle kisses, already forgetting her. Jillian stood there trembling. The smell of roasted meats, honeyed fruits, and fragrant spices clung to her senses, so thick and heady she could almost hear them. Her stomach twisted violently. She swayed slightly, dizzy from the hunger and the weight of humiliation. What can I eat then? Her voice came out of a whispered whine, half plea, half prayer, cast into the din of laughter and feasting. No answer. Only a few glances in her direction, vague, disinterested, or vaguely amused, before returning to their master's pleasure. It was then that she noticed all the servants were women, beautiful, silent, attentive. They tended to Joss like he was the only living thing in the room worth feeding. And Jillian remembered the man from the night before, the one who had mocked such decadence, who scoffed at nobles and false gods. And now he sat at the center of it all, drunk on adoration and spirit wine. What do humans eat, anyways? He chided quietly, besides fruit and sin. His words stirred something deep within her, some forgotten resolve, the very intention she'd carried like a stone all day. It rose now, overtaking hunger and fatigue alike. The words burst from her, unfiltered and fierce. Take me on the pilgrimage, she cried, louder than she meant to. Take me to the gates of Eden. The music faltered, not with silence, with a clumsy, awkward downbeat that made her words land even harder. A sharp echo of her own voice seemed to slap her in return. All eyes turned. For a breathless moment, the feast held its breath. The floating flames drew back like startled animals, and the radiant light dimmed as if recoiling from the weight of her demand. And then, laughter. High, cold, cruel, mocking laughter, unrestrained and merciless. Jost and the guests pointed at her, jeering at her courage as if it were comedy, her foolishness as if it were fact. Jost laughed hardest of all, doubling over, women at his side howling with him. At last, worn down by the repeated buckling of his ribs, he settled into a quiet chuckle. He wiped a tear from his eye and said simply, No, then laughed again, softer this time, as if to himself. The pilgrimage, he muttered, spitting the words like a bad taste, and drowning the bitterness in more wine. She stood still for a moment, the laughter ringing in her ears like cruel bells. Her face burned, but she didn't flinch, not this time. Then, with a breath, she stepped forward. Not loud, not shrill, just clear. "You mock me," she said, "but you forget yourself." The guest stirred. Jost raised a brow. "You are the child of the angels," she went on, her voice steadier now. "A high elf. One of the few still bound to the old ways. Leading the pilgrimage to Eden is not a joke. It's your duty. A sacred one. Or have you laughed yourself free of that too?" The room quieted again, but this silence felt different, uneasy, watchful. Julian kept her gaze fixed on him. "You feast and play at being a ghost while the world rots. You say you command spirits, but you can't even lead the living." The laughter died abruptly. Jost leaned forward again to stare down at the girl with eyes wide and darkening as he fixed her frozen in his gaze. "I'm not bound, girlie, and my father's a devil. You've mistaken me for something I'm not. Go ask one of those flowery little pantywaists in some major city eager to play holy for the sake of their fragile egos. I'm done with pilgrimages and piety. I only slay demons when it suits me." He sat back and stared down as Yodi, the first spirit he'd called after destroying the castle, filled his goblet to the brim with golden liquid. He slammed it down his throat, then jutted the cup out for a refill. The music had ceased. The air turned still. One by one, the carousing spirits vanished. The lights dimmed slightly. Those who remained stared at Jillian in silence, their beautiful faces carved with either disdain or pity, perhaps both. From the edge of defeat, Jillian found her voice again. Risen, then raised by a strange compulsion pushing up from her feet. "How can you look so much like Josirian, the great and pious sage king of the High Elves, and behave like this? You are no noble elf." Jost rose from his disheveled makeshift throne, which vanished along with the courtesans draped over him. The silver chalice in his grasp trembled, its golden contents spilling over his fingers like tears. "Josirian was my grandfather," he said, voice like ice, "and his piety did not save him. His charity was his undoing, and I will not be a slave to virtue like he was." He leered cruelly. "As for noble, there is none worth knowing more than myself. I may carry his curse and his face, but I am no sacrificial lamb. I am the pyre where it burns." He downed the rest of the goblet and held it out for a refill, but the spirits were gone. The lights faded, until only he and the girl remained in the dark and lonely woods. When he dropped the goblet, it vanished like dust on an otherworldly wind. Josh shook, not from anger, not from cold, but from something deeper than bone. "It's late, girlie," he muttered. He turned, walked a short distance, spread his newly mended jacket on the ground, and lay on it in a fetal position, as though to sleep. Jillian, too, felt a great weight settle over her. She sank into slumber on the soil. Chapter 8. "You know this isn't my fault, right?" The words slithered into Jillian's ears and coiled around her brain, making it itch. "None of this is my fault." It was Jost. Of course it was Jost. Even in her dreams he'd rambled and mocked her, and now, in the early ebb of daylight, his voice rattled her awake. "Things would have turned out the same. You would have ended up in that castle either way. Granted, I could have come sooner or cleaned things up immediately, but nothing would really be different, so it's not my fault. Not really." She sat up, blinking into the light. A cold layer of dew clung to her skin and sent a shiver through her frame. As she shook off sleep, she spotted him nearby, crouched low, eyes hollow and distant, like he hadn't slept at all. "It all started with the fucked up way this world was formed." Jillian stood and looked at Jost for a moment, then turned away. Relying on a soul that chaotic didn't seem wise. Without a word, she picked a direction and started walking, hoping it was the right one. The woods felt less hostile today, but the gnawing in her stomach grew with every step, each churn of emptiness making her legs feel heavier, her resolve thinner. As she stepped away from the mauling elf, his voice faded into the growing chorus of the forest. A strange mix of freedom and fear surged in her chest. For the first time, she was truly alone, gaining distance from a dangerous element and stepping into uncertainty. For the next hour, she pushed through the brush and tangled roots, following faint wildlife trails with cautious optimism. Then, almost suddenly, she stumbled onto a proper path. Relief washed over her, followed by a quiet swell of pride. Looking down the trail toward the dawn, her heart soared with the thrill of what adventures might await. Perhaps she would reach a major city, find a proper high elf, one sworn to uphold the sacred rites of the pilgrimage. See, in the beginning was God. At the sound of the voice coming from behind her, her skeleton tried to leap from her body while her heart sank. It was Jost. Of course it was Jost. And God was good. Some might say perfect. But he was alone, with no one to appreciate him. Jillian didn't bother turning around. She picked up her pace, bare feet crunching on the path. The tall elf followed, effortlessly matching her stride as if out for a casual stroll. How do you know God isn't a she? She snapped over her shoulder. Who says God can't be a woman? The answer came quick and flat, like it was obvious. Because God is a boy's name. Now don't interrupt. So God made for himself two sons, crafted from the only stuff he knew at the time, being good and feeling good. And he called them Justice and Pride. With these two hands to extend his reach, he set about making the universe, planet by planet. Justice, the force of right action, did the heavy lifting. Pride, the sense of worth and precision, measured and checked each creation to ensure it was perfect. And for a time, things went well. The cosmos spun in harmony. God was pleased, but eventually, he grew tired of nailing it every time. Perfection dulled him, so he devised a plan, or maybe just a cruel little experiment. What if he made a world with justice, but without pride? No measure, no mirror, no sense of whether the work was beautiful or broken. Surely that would end his infinite boredom. So he gave his task to justice alone, the duller of the two, the one without foresight or reflection, driven only by impulse and action. Work was slow and riddled with flaws. To create order, justice first had to start in disorder. Like a child with blocks, he was just ambling about. There was a long pause. Shut up! He suddenly shouted. Jillian flinched, nearly stumbling at the outburst. Especially strange since she hadn't said a word. She had only kept walking, following the path she'd chosen while being berated by fairy tales from behind. He went on. Well, Pride was hurt to be left out, you see. So that's when he started getting in the way. Not that he had to do much. Well, justice was all impulse, no thought. To even grasp the concept of life, justice had to start small, single, simple things. He used them like blocks, stacking and tweaking. When a big one ate a little one and neither of them died, he figured he was onto something. Reciprocal altruism was born of symbiosis. Joss went on like this for a while, making Jillian's head spin more than the heat and exhaustion combined. The pain radiating up from her feet eventually slowed her to a whimpering limp. But still the dark shadow of the ignoble elf loomed behind her, prattling on about cells and microorganisms. He was just reaching the part about how the division of the sexes at the micro level had birthed all conflict, thus inevitably armored fish, when Jillian finally buckled and collapsed along the path. He sat beside her in silence as she nursed her aching feet, her breath shallow with fatigue. He stared wistfully into the distance. Such frailty, he murmured. She glanced down at his battered, dirt-clad feet, at her battered, dirt-clad feet, swollen and throbbing like they'd grown several sizes too large. Then noticing his own pale, broad feet resting bare in the dust, she asked softly, "Why don't you wear boots? Why go barefoot?" "Dissipates the evil," he said with a dry sniff. "Poorly designed things, really. Did I mention we all come from fish? Same nervous system and these stupid land paddles." He wiggled his toes and made a critical face as if personally offended by their design. "I can see why people want to cover them, but, you know, evil." He jutted a thumb toward himself, and Jillian thought she caught a flicker of sadness pass over his face. Before she could feel sorry for him, he reverted to his childish, maddening self. "So are you healed yet?" he asked impatiently. When she just stared at him in disbelief, he added, "Oh, right. Human." He sighed, long, theatrical, and full of resignation. "Fine, I guess you have a point." In one smooth motion he spun into a crouch before her, looming like a beast about to pounce. Then he placed a palm over her feet. Jillian nearly jumped up from the sudden spark of familiar fireball forming there. "Relax, girlie," he growled. "It only burned evil." A soft warmth spread from her feet, and with it all the soreness, exhaustion, and ache drained away. She was left not merely rested, but restored, revived to a level of health she didn't even remember having. Every ache was gone. except the hunger, which roared back with a vengeance. Joss prattled on throughout the rest of the day, his endless musings on the stages of evolution, both body and mind, lasting until sunset. All the while, he blamed justice for what he called repeated extinction events, his voice a relentless marching drum driving her forward to some unknown conclusion. As the sun sank, Jillian's body sank along the path with it, her limbs heavy with every mile, her mind heavier still beneath the weight of every word. Through the noisy pain of her stomach, she slept in phases, noting that Joss only sat, pensive, as if waiting to resume his long sermon the moment she stirred. Chapter 9. The next day she awoke to a raging swoon of hunger that made the world spin. When she tried to stand, she only managed a few crawling paces before collapsing, her body echoing with empty ache. Jost, already chewing on something, watched her with detached interest. "What's wrong?" he asked, more annoyed than concerned. The sight of the small cake-like morsel in his hand made her spirit lurch forward to seize it, though her body stayed slumped and useless. "Oh, this?" He held it just out of reach. "This one's mine." He took another bite and chewed slowly. "I do have another one." From his other pocket he produced a second, identical cake, untouched, perfect. Jillian stretched out her arms, desperate. "But I'm saving it," he said, slipping it back into his pocket, and rising to amble down the path. "I could share, of course, but then," he glanced back at her with impish glee, "you'd become my servant, my slave, whisked away to a magical castle with a harem of spirits. No aging, no worries, no pilgrimage. But it would get you closer to Eden. You'd just never be able to leave." Jillian felt mocked. Her stomach growled so loudly it forced the words from her mouth. "You must be lying to torture me. Do you enjoy watching me suffer?" "A bit," he said lightly, "but you hurt my feelings when you said I wasn't noble, so there." He tapped his belt buckle as if it somehow made his claim credible. "Besides, I can't lie." He turned, came back, and crouched in front of her, waving his half-eaten cake just inches from her face. "So what do you say?" he whispered. "One bite and the hunger ends. One bite and this whole troubling world vanishes. You'll be a servant, yes, but in the best life you've ever known. You'll never leave, but you'll never suffer again. Worth it?" He paused. "Or will you keep stumbling after your silly little venture?" Jillian stood, shaking, starving, but upright. Her hunger trembled through her bones, but still she faced him, defiant. "Well, fine then," he said, rising and towering above her. Stretching a long, lazy finger toward a nearby field, he mumbled through his mouthful. "That field's full of edible plants and mushrooms. There's your feast. Medicinal, too." With that, he sat back down and watched her like a shepherd watching his sheep graze. Jillian turned to the greenery, uncertain. She reached for a bright purple flower. "Careful, girlie," he warned. A knife, familiar, sang through the air and stuck in the dirt at her feet. Startled, she turned. Joss was still chewing, looking as innocent as a lamb. She glanced back at the flower, thorns, long and barbed, twined around its stalk. She picked up the knife and slid it into the stem of the plant instead. The blade revealed a white, meaty core beneath the skin. She plucked a piece and placed it on her tongue. Bitter, at first, but the bitterness gave way to a sweet, savory finish. She stripped the plant quickly and devoured what little it offered. Then, like a veil lifting, the sprawling empty field transformed before her eyes. No longer barren, but a banquet laid out just for her. As Jillian picked through the greenery, testing each plant for its secrets, Joss prattled on in his typical diabolical way. "Such a pity," he sighed, slumping down nearby as she foraged. "Life is life, and all life comes from the sun, an eternal flame that would consume us if it were closer. It makes the plants grow and turns its endless fire into food, which is eaten by creatures made to eat, who in turn become food for others. And when they die, the plants consume their remains. All eating, all eaten, all fire. Justice may have had a point when he first tried to make man in his image. He didn't start by mashing dirt together, no. He began with what he knew best. Fire. But fire hates to comply. It refuses to conform to any one shape or order. This is how Ifrits came to be. No two looked alike. You'd never guess they were kin except for their attitudes. So the first beings made from fire, to resemble the angels, flowed through the levels and plains like water through a sieve. Fire consumes, then rises, leaving ash behind. Its very nature is to ascend. These early flamelings, the Ifrits, passed through creation without restraint. One of them, more defiant than the rest, rose higher than any dared. He entered heaven itself and stood face to face with God. And in that moment of perfect rebellion, he bowed, the first created being to choose God. Jillian listened more than she wanted to, while hunger made her dizzy. There was a part still hungering for more than food. His name was Azazel, Joss said, speaking with unfamiliar reverence for the sarcastic elf, a name given to him by the Creator when he was raised to the rank of angel. Well, that didn't sit well with Pride. Some late stage being ascending to his ranks did not bode well for a created angel of light. So while old Justice busied himself with his creations, Pride went to work, sowing seeds of sedition in heaven. It wasn't long before rebellion blossomed, and Azazel was instrumental in burning away the chaff. Yet still, the infestation of heaven had begun, and the roots had buried themselves deep beneath its golden paths. War raged until Justice finally looked up from his work and returned to the highest realms. He crushed the uprising and cast Pride into the void of chaos, along with a third of the angels, the Ifrits, and all others foolish enough to follow him. Joss' voice dropped low. Now it was Azazel's time to be proud. Proud to be a faithful follower of the Creator and his justice. Jillian reached for a sweet-smelling plant with lush purple berries, just as Jost caught her with yet more words. Don't eat that one. It'll make you shit for days. She froze, blinking at the fruit she just severed from its stem. The aroma had quickened her hunger, just as her fingers had reached for the first bite. Try that instead, Joss said, pointing to a plain weed she passed 100 times along the path. Pilgrim's footprint. Seems perfect for you. He crouched beside it and began pointing out several other weeds and humble flowers she'd overlooked, naming their healing properties faster than her empty stomach could track. In the end, she only remembered which ones were good, and which ones she might make her regret not listening. She ate what she could of the bitter blend of herbs and felt better, were it not for her stomach, now full but fighting a different battle entirely, as the strange blend of familiar, overlooked plants worked their magic inside her. Her energy temporarily restored. She set off again down the path, with Jost like a wraith at her heels. At times his strides were so wide and careless that she'd see a pale, bare foot swing beside her, as if he might stride right over her without a thought. She'd have to quicken her pace just to stay ahead of being trampled. More than once, when she spotted a stranger, someone she might have asked for help or directions, they turned and fled at the sight of the looming dark figure. Interesting. He seemed to revel in their fear, or perhaps the ability to keep her from asking for proper food. He went on with his fable, never missing a chance to berate.